Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
You ever have one of those moments where the air feels heavier than it should? Like even oxygen is choosing sides? That's exactly how it felt. Standing in my parents' backyard, the grill smoke curling up like some kind of holy incense around my father as he made the same old joke about his famous ribs, and mom passed out paper plates like they were gold leaf china. Everyone was there, my cousins with their loud kids, my Uncle Don, who still thinks Reagan's coming back, and of course, her. Molly, my little sister, the golden one, the favorite. Molly breezed in 40 minutes late, looking like she just walked off a goddamn Pinterest board, all white dress and tan legs, and that effortless, breezy smile she's been perfecting since she was 15. And like a goddamn reflex, the whole backyard turned toward her like sunflowers. My mom actually clapped her hands. Clapped. There she is, my superstar. Dad raised his beer like he was about to toast a Nobel laureate. Meanwhile, I was standing 2 feet away, holding a tray of hot dogs that were starting to slip in my hands because the foil was too hot. Nobody even looked. No one said, "Hey, Jenna, thanks for doing all this." Not a damn word. We sat down around the big fold-out tables, plastic cutlery clicking, and just as I was reaching for the coleslaw, Dad stood up and cleared his throat like he was about to give a speech at a wedding. "I just want to say," he said, "how proud your mother and I are of Molly. What an incredible year she's had. That promotion at the firm, the magazine interview, and of course, planning that big wedding. You never stop amazing us, sweetheart." Molly blushed and did that fake, modest wave she's always done, like, "Oh, stop," but everyone kept clapping anyway. I watched my mother dab her eyes with a napkin. Dad sat down with this satisfied look, like he'd just signed a peace treaty. I sat there, hands in my lap, silent, staring at my plate like it might offer me a way out. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. I stood up and started clearing plates even while people were still chewing. That's the thing about being the responsible one. You can be starving, and people will still hand you their garbage like it's your job. I carried the dishes inside, set them in the sink, and just stood there for a minute. The house was quiet. The noise from the backyard filtered in through the screen door. Laughter, clinking glasses, someone playing country music too loud from their phone. And in that moment, I realized something. I hadn't even expected them to mention me. I didn't hope for it. That hope had died years ago. It was like I was a piece of furniture in the family. Useful, solid, dependable, but not worthy of celebration, not even acknowledgement. I didn't cry. I don't cry over this stuff anymore. But something in me shifted, quietly, like a lever had been pulled inside my chest. I didn't go back outside. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the scratched wood, thinking about all the years I'd spent swallowing disappointment like it was communion. Here's a question for you, and I really want you to think about this. Have you ever been the one who doesn't get noticed? The one who remembers birthdays, brings wine to dinner, fixes the damn Wi-Fi, shows up early and leaves late, but no one claps for you? What does that do to a person over time? What did it do to you? It was almost 10 when the last of the guests trickled out. I heard the screen door slam a few times, muffled goodbyes, and eventually just the hum of crickets and the buzz of the fridge. My mom came inside and started rinsing off a few dishes without saying a word. We stood side by side in silence, the way we always did, like two co-workers at the end of a shift, not a mother and daughter. And then I did something different. I looked at her, really looked, not just my usual half smile and nod. I turned and looked at her like she was a stranger, like I was trying to figure out what made her tick. She caught my eye and something passed between us. Not words, but weight. Like she suddenly saw everything I'd never said. It lasted less than 5 seconds, but it hit like a punch. I went home without saying goodbye. Drove the 10 miles back to my apartment in silence. No music, no calls. I just let my thoughts spin out across the dashboard like a film reel, playing every version of that night where someone might have said, "Jenna, we're proud of you too." And then, just as I was brushing my teeth, I got the text from Molly. 8 words. "What did you say to Mom? She hasn't stopped crying." I stared at the screen for a long time, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I hadn't said a damn thing. Not yet. It's funny how memory doesn't play fair, how it comes back in fragments you never asked for, in the quiet minutes after midnight, when the world is still and there's nothing left to distract you from yourself. That night, after Molly's text, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above my bed, and out of nowhere, I remembered a spelling bee from 3rd grade. I'd stayed up for 3 nights practicing words like metamorphosis and benevolent, my little fingers flipping through the dictionary my dad had given me the year before, hoping maybe this time, if I won, if I stood on that auditorium stage and spelled my heart out, maybe then they'd look at me like they looked at her. I placed 2nd, not 1st, but I remember being proud until I got in the car and Mom said, "If you just slowed down on that last word, Jenna, you might have taken the win. No, I'm proud of you. No, good job. Just advice for next time." Molly, 3 years younger, got a participation trophy the same week for showing up to a dance recital in the wrong shoes. They threw her a little cake at home and took pictures. I was the one who made the cake. Chocolate, with store-bought frosting because Mom said she didn't have time that week. That pattern didn't fade. It just matured, like wine gone sour. By the time we were teenagers, Molly had learned to cry just right. Delicate, beautiful tears that made adults lean in and pat her hand, tell her how brave she was. I, on the other hand, learned to bottle it all up, to fold my pain into perfect little corners, and tuck it away behind sarcastic smiles and good grades. I became the one who didn't need attention, which is exactly how you become invisible. In college, when Molly failed her first year of biology and wanted to drop out, she moved back home. My parents redecorated her room and made her smoothies every morning. I was 3 hours away, working 2 jobs to pay my rent. And when I got the flu and ended up in urgent care, I texted my mom. She replied the next morning, "Oh, honey, take some zinc. That's what Dr. Oz recommends." The truth is, when you grow up as the reliable one, no one checks if your back's breaking. They just keep piling on weight and thanking you for being so strong. So no, I didn't say anything to Mom at the barbecue, but maybe, finally, I let my silence speak for itself. Maybe that look I gave her in the kitchen, that 5-second stare, held 30 years of words I never said out loud. Maybe it showed her all the birthdays she forgot to call me on, all the times she passed me over to praise my sister, all the Sunday dinners where she asked Molly about her weekend, but never once asked if I was seeing anyone or if I was okay. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30. Too early for telemarketers. Too early for anyone but family, really. I picked up, still groggy, and heard my father's voice, low, clipped, and carrying that sharp edge I'd grown up fearing but now recognized as a pure defensiveness. "What the hell did you say to your mother last night?" I sat up in bed, the covers bunching around my legs, and for a moment I didn't answer. Because what do you say to a question like that, when the answer is absolutely nothing, and yet everything? I didn't say a word, I said, keeping my voice even, calm, like I was speaking to a client instead of my father. "She's in the bedroom crying," he said, as if that was the most unnatural thing in the world. "Won't talk to me, won't come out. You need to fix this." Fix this, that's always been my role, hasn't it? The fixer, the buffer, the emotional janitor cleaning up after other people's messes. I wanted to scream into the phone, to tell him that maybe, just maybe, she was crying because she finally saw what she'd done, but I didn't. Because deep down, I knew he wouldn't hear me. He never has. "I didn't break her," I said instead, and hung up. I didn't get out of bed right away. I lay there staring out the window as the sun lit up the tops of the trees, and thought about how even now, when my mother was crying, when she was finally unraveling just a little, the first instinct wasn't to ask what she had done. It was to come after me, to ask what I'd done to her. That's the problem with being the daughter who doesn't cause a scene. When you finally do, even quietly, they act like you've committed a crime. I got up, showered, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through old photos on my phone, Molly in a white sundress, smiling on a dock somewhere, Mom and Dad kissing on their 30th anniversary, me off to the side in half of them, holding the camera in the rest, always just outside the spotlight, always just close enough to feel the heat, but never warm. I didn't text Molly back. I didn't call my dad. I just sat there watching my reflection in the black coffee, wondering how many times a person can be made to feel small before they disappear entirely. But something had changed. That lever inside me, the one that shifted the night before, it had locked into place. This wasn't about getting even. It was about finally being done. With the silence, with the denial, with carrying the emotional load of people who never once asked if it was too heavy. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. Not quietly, not politely, and certainly not apologetically. There's a particular kind of silence that lives in a house after an argument, especially the kind that doesn't explode but simmers under the surface, the kind where no voices are raised and no doors are slammed. Yet somehow, everything feels scorched and broken anyway. That's the kind of silence I walked into the next afternoon, standing in the doorway of my parents' kitchen, that overly familiar space where the linoleum hasn't changed since 1991, and the coffee pot still groans like it's dying every morning, but no one replaces it because it still works well enough. I hadn't planned to go over there, not initially, but something had pulled me. A mix of curiosity and some old muscle memory of responsibility. Like part of me still believed it was my job to clean up after messes, even ones I didn't make. My mom was sitting at the table, her back straight, hands folded tightly in her lap, like she was holding herself together by sheer will. There were no tissues, no puffy eyes, no dramatic display, just this brittle stillness that was, in its own way, louder than any outburst could have been. For a second, neither of us said anything. I didn't ask if I could sit. I just pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, and folded my hands, mirroring hers without meaning to. I heard from Dad, I said finally, my voice low but steady. He said you've been crying. She didn't look at me, not directly. Her eyes flicked toward the window over the sink, where the light came in sharp and unforgiving. I'm fine, she said. I'm just tired. That was the phrase she'd always used when she didn't want to talk, when we were little and she'd been crying in her bedroom, or when she came home from visiting her mother in hospice and didn't want to explain the weight of watching someone disappear in pieces. Tired, like it was a blanket excuse for everything she didn't have the energy to face. I didn't say anything at the barbecue, I reminded her, watching her carefully. I didn't start anything. She nodded slowly, like she believed me, but also like that wasn't the point. You looked at me like I was a stranger, she said after a long pause. Like I disgusted you. I opened my mouth to argue but stopped. Because she wasn't wrong. I had looked at her that way. Not with hate, not even with anger exactly, but with this cold, distant disappointment that had been building inside me for decades. I'd looked at her like I'd finally stopped hoping. And maybe that's what broke her. You've always been so good at not saying things, she whispered. So good at holding it all in. I thought that meant you were okay. That hit harder than I expected, because it wasn't said with malice. It wasn't even an excuse. It was just ignorance. Painful, well-meaning ignorance that had shaped our entire relationship. She thought I didn't need anything. She thought silence meant strength. She thought my ability to cope was permission to ignore me. I wasn't okay, I said quietly. I'm still not. She flinched, and for a moment I thought she might reach for me, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling like the answer might be written in the cracks above us. I had to protect her, she said finally. Molly, you don't understand. Then explain it, I said, maybe a little sharper than I meant to. Make me understand why she gets a toast and I get the trash duty, why every milestone she hits gets a banner and balloons while mine get ignored, why my entire life has been a footnote to hers. She didn't answer right away. Her lip trembled, and I could tell she was weighing something, not just how to respond, but whether to say anything at all. You don't know what she went through, she said finally. Not really. You were away at college. She was breaking. She wanted to die, Jenna. We found pills under her bed. She'd been crying every night, faking smiles. We almost lost her. The air left the room like a vacuum had opened. I stared at her, stunned. Not because I didn't believe her, but because no one had ever told me. Not one word. She was 18, Mom continued, her voice flat now. And you were always strong, always composed, always fine. I thought we had to give her more because she needed more. And what about what I needed? I asked, barely above a whisper. What about the moments I sat alone in my dorm, thinking I wasn't enough? What about the years I spent wondering what I did wrong? Did it ever occur to you that maybe I needed something too? She looked broken then. Not dramatic tears or wailing grief, just this small, shattering realization spreading across her face, like she'd only just now understood what she'd cost me. I didn't know, she said. I swear to God, Jenna, I didn't know you felt that way. That's the problem, I said. You didn't even think to ask. We sat there, the clock ticking loud on the wall, filling the silence between us like static. I didn't expect an apology, not a real one. People like her, they don't say sorry in the ways that matter. They offer explanations, justifications, careful sentences meant to ease their own guilt more than yours. But before I left, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I walked into the living room, opened the old drawer under the TV cabinet, the one where my mom keeps all the sentimental junk, and took something. She didn't stop me, didn't even ask what I was doing. She just watched, silent, as I slipped a small leather-bound book into my bag. Her journal, I didn't even know she kept one until that moment. But somehow, I knew it would have answers. Maybe not the kind I wanted, but the kind I needed. When I got back to my car and sat behind the wheel, the leather felt warm against my palm, like it had been waiting for me. I didn't open it yet. I just stared out the windshield, the sun catching the tops of the trees again, and thought about all the conversations we'd never had, all the truths buried under politeness, all the pain masked by, I'm fine, but not anymore. Now I wanted the truth, even if it hurt, especially if it did. There's something strange about reading your mother's handwriting, not on birthday cards or recipe notes, but in the raw, unfiltered pages of a journal she never meant for you to see. The words don't just sit on the page. They bleed, stretch, twist themselves around the memories you thought you understood, and quietly unravel everything you've believed for decades. I sat on my couch that night, the old leather-bound book open in my lap, its spine cracking gently as I turned the first page, and I felt a coldness settle in my chest. Not fear, not exactly, but a heavy, anticipatory dread that maybe I was about to learn something that would make it impossible to go back to the version of my family I'd clung to, even after everything. The entries weren't dated in any proper order. Some were crammed with details. What Molly ate, how she cried herself to sleep, the names of doctors, the dosage of medications I never knew she took. While others were brief, like passing thoughts captured in haste before the moment slipped away. The further I read, the more I saw not just my sister through my mother's eyes, but the version of herself my mother only dared to reveal when no one was looking. There were pages and pages filled with panic, with fear, with guilt about not noticing Molly's pain earlier, about not understanding what to do when your child is smiling one minute and quietly planning her own disappearance the next. It was jarring, terrifying even, because no matter how distant I'd felt from Molly all those years, no matter how much resentment had festered inside me like a slow poison, I'd never wanted her to suffer, and certainly never imagined how close we'd all come to losing her without even realizing it. I read about the night they found her curled in the hallway, clutching her stomach, white as a sheet, and how my father drove to the hospital with one hand on the wheel and the other gripping her wrist, like he thought she might vanish if he let go. But what struck me more than the panic, more than the clinical facts or motherly fears, was the way my name showed up. Not in concern, not in reflection, but almost as an afterthought. Jenna's doing fine, one line read. Another 2 pages later. Jenna called today. I didn't have the energy to pick up. Then again, Richard says we should ask Jenna to come home for a weekend. I said no. It might make Molly feel worse. Always peripheral. Always the stable one. The self-sufficient adult who didn't need anything. Whose absence was a relief, not a worry. I was a punctuation mark in the sentences about someone else's suffering. And then I found it. Buried toward the back, a single line that made my throat close up. Jenna's too strong to worry about. Too strong to worry about. Like strength was immunity. Like because I didn't scream or cry or fall apart, I didn't deserve to be seen. I closed the journal for a moment, pressed my fingers against my eyes until I saw stars, and tried to swallow the lump forming in my throat, because that line wasn't a compliment. It was a diagnosis. It was the reason they never clapped for me, never asked me how I was holding up, never gave me space to be anything less than resilient. I had been cast as the emotional adult at 13 years old, and everyone just ran with it. But the worst part hadn't come yet. I flipped to the last few pages, and there the handwriting became messier, shakier, like the thoughts had come out in a rush she couldn't contain. There was an entry from what I guessed was only a year ago, something recent enough to feel fresh, like the ink might still be drying. If she ever finds out what Richard did that night, my mother wrote, we'll lose her too. I froze. The words swam in front of my eyes. I read them again and again. What Richard did that night. My stomach twisted in a way I hadn't felt in years. A dark, sour tightness that clawed at the edges of memory, trying to make sense of something that didn't yet have shape. There was no follow-up, no explanation, no context. Just that one terrifying sentence, dropped like a stone in the middle of a still pond, ripples spreading through everything I thought I knew. I sat in silence for nearly an hour, the journal open but untouched in my lap, as I replayed every memory of my father from the past 30 years, searching for cracks, for clues, for anything that might explain what she could have meant. And then the coldest realization of all crept in. I couldn't rule anything out, because I didn't know, because there were gaps. Because like so many daughters, I'd spent my life assuming my father was the steady hand on the tiller, the calm in the storm, the protector. But now, all I could think about was the way he had called me after the barbecue, not to ask if I was okay, not to understand, but to accuse, to demand I fix whatever mess I had supposedly made. I didn't sleep that night. I barely moved. I just sat with the journal, the weight of its pages anchoring me to a reality I didn't ask for, a truth I hadn't yet uncovered but now couldn't ignore. And I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I needed to ask the question, not to my mother, not to Molly, but to the one person who held the answer, the one person whose silence had suddenly become the loudest voice in my head. What did you do, Dad? Because whatever it was, I had a feeling it was the kind of truth that didn't just explain a family. It could shatter it. There are moments in life that unfold not with dramatic fanfare, not with raised voices or crashing glass, but with the quiet weight of inevitability. Moments that feel so heavy and final that even the air seems to hold its breath. The day I went to see my father, the day I finally asked the question I'd been circling since I read that single damning sentence in my mother's journal, was one of those moments. I didn't rehearse my words, didn't map out my tone or build an argument. I simply got in my car, drove the familiar 15-minute route to the house where I'd grown up, and walked in through the side door like I always had, knowing full well that nothing on the other side of it would ever be quite the same again. He was in the garage, fiddling with an old radio that had probably stopped working before I graduated high school, acting like retirement had turned him into some kind of electronics guru, which was a laughable notion if you knew the man. I stood there for a few seconds, letting the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of motor oil settle into my nose, watching the way his hands moved over the dial with a sort of performative focus, like he was trying to look busier than he felt. I read Mom's journal, I said, without preamble, my voice calm but deliberate. the kind of calm that comes when you've already accepted the worst possibilities. He didn't look up at first, but his hand stilled, just for a moment, before he resumed turning the knob as if I hadn't spoken. There's a line in there, I continued, taking a step closer, where she says, "If Jenna ever finds out what Richard did that night, we'll lose her too." Now he stopped. Completely, his hands dropped to the workbench, and he stared down at the tools laid out before him like they might rearrange themselves into an answer he didn't have to give. He didn't ask what night, didn't feign confusion, and that silence, that damning, deliberate silence, told me more than any words could have. "I need you to tell me what it means," I said. "I need to hear it from you." He turned slowly, and for the first time in years, he didn't look like the man who'd driven me to school with coffee in his thermos and sports radio on the dial. He looked smaller, diminished, like the weight of whatever truth he was holding had finally begun to crush the persona he'd worn for so long. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "There was a night when Molly was 17, he said, eyes locked on mine, "when she got into a fight with your mother and stormed out. I followed her, thinking I could calm her down. She was crying, she was angry, and I touched her shoulder, tried to pull her back to the car, and she flinched so hard she fell into the ditch. I waited." The words hung in the air like dust caught in sunlight, but he didn't continue. "That's it?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. His eyes dropped. "She screamed. People saw. Someone called the police, but by the time they arrived, we were back home, and she lied for me, said I didn't hurt her, said it was a misunderstanding. Your mother believed her, but I think she always wondered." My stomach turned, not just because of what he'd said, but because of what he hadn't. The deliberate vagueness, the way he left just enough unsaid to keep control of the narrative, to protect himself from something worse. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in my life, I saw not a father, not a protector, but a man, flawed, weak, and hiding behind a fortress of half-truths. I turned and walked out without another word, not because I didn't have more to say, but because I knew if I stayed, I'd start trying to fix it, to make it neat, to rationalize, and I was done doing that. The next night, I invited Molly to dinner. Just the two of us, no parents, no distractions. We met at a quiet little place downtown, the kind with linen napkins and soft lighting, where you could pretend things were normal, even when they weren't. She looked tired when she walked in, like she hadn't been sleeping, and her smile was tentative, fragile, like it might crack if I pushed too hard. We ordered wine. We made small talk. And then I told her, not everything, not the line from the journal, not my conversation with Dad, but just enough. Enough to finally let her know I saw it. Saw her, saw what she carried, even if I didn't know all the details. "I was angry for a long time," I said, meeting her eyes across the table. "I thought you took everything, the attention, the praise, the love, but now I understand. You didn't take it. They gave it to you because they thought you needed it more, because they thought I'd survive without it." She blinked fast, then nodded, a single sharp motion that looked more like a survival reflex than agreement. "Do you hate me?" she asked, and her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. "No," I said. "I finally see you." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just finished our dinner, paid the bill, and walked out into the night with a strange kind of peace sitting between us. Not resolution, not healing, but understanding. And maybe that was enough. A year later, at the next family barbecue, I did something different. I stood up. I held a glass of wine in one hand and tapped it gently with a fork until the chattering died down. My parents, sitting side by side under the patio umbrella, looked up, surprised. Molly met my gaze across the lawn and gave me the smallest of nods. "I just want to raise a glass," I said, my voice clear and steady, "to the daughter who didn't make a scene, to the one who kept the peace, who carried the weight, who showed up early and stayed late. To me." There was a pause, a silence that stretched long and strange, And then slowly, Molly raised her glass, and then someone else, and someone else, until the yard shimmered with the faint clink of acknowledgement. I didn't need applause, I didn't need a speech. I just needed that one moment, that one glass in the air, to remind them, and myself, that I was there too, and for once they saw me.